Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia Volume 1, and this article is entitled Whitney, Orson Ferguson. So Orson F. Whitney. This is an interesting one to me because I'm kind of filling in a gap between the Lives of Our Leaders series and the Greatness in Men series. They skipped right over Orson F. Whitney. And I think that the reason is because of the time that he served. He just missed like a window where they were covering the people who were alive at the time. And so this is filling in a gap of probably like 40, 50 years of people who had served during that time. So I have videos on all of the people around him, except not on him. So, Orson F. Whitney, what do I know about him? Well, let's see. I don't know that much about him, to be honest. I would say I know that he was a writer and he loved poetry. He wrote several of the articles we've read so far, and he tends to wax poetic, which can be a little bit irritating to me, I'm not gonna lie. But it's good-naturedly. I know that some people prefer the flowery language. I'm just not one of them. I'm a much more straightforward person. But I think that I don't know that much else about him. I think he was born in the church, which wasn't super common, but at that time it wasn't that uncommon either. So I think it was kind of 50-50. So since I don't know that many details about him, I would say let's just go ahead and read the article. It is quite a long article, which means it was probably very comprehensive. So I'm sure we will get to know a lot of information based just on this article by Andrew Jenson. Yeah? Andrew Jenson can also wax a touch poetical, I'm not gonna lie, but hopefully it's not too bad. We will see. By the way, I probably did it in After Effects, but the article on Moses Thatcher was really long, and I cut out probably, at least 20 minutes of it, just because it was just so much. It was just too much, to the point of thinking do we need to go through this again, and so if that happens here, I will do the same thing. I just feel like the whole point of these videos is to make it easy to get to know one of the general authorities of the past, not to wax poetical and get really excited about going on and on about some subject that doesn't matter, that's not even relevant to the topic. And so anytime that happens, I will be cutting out sections. So I think that that's better than trying to read through the whole thing. Otherwise we'll just all be bored the whole time. I have done that in the past, and I would like to change that in the future. Anyway, so let's take a look at the article. Whitney, Orson Ferguson, Bishop of the 18th Ward, Salt Lake City, Utah. Oh, was his article based because he was a bishop? Was this before he was called into the Quorum of the 12? Oh, that probably is the case. This was written in 1901. Ooh, this is not at all up to date. Okay, Bishop of the 18th Ward, Salt Lake City, Utah, was born in Salt Lake City, Sunday, July 1st, 1855. His father, Horace Kimball Whitney. Okay, Horace Kimball Whitney was one of the Utah pioneers when the eldest son of Newell K. Whitney. Okay, so he was the grandson of Newell K. Whitney. I don't think I knew that. Newell K. Whitney had a store in Kirtland, and it was a pretty common meeting place, and I don't remember if he served as a general authority. Let me look it up really quick. He was presiding bishop. Yeah, he was presiding bishop for a couple of years. Okay, interesting. Huh. So Newell K. Whitney, the second presiding bishop of the church. His mother, Helen Marr Whitney, was the eldest daughter of Heber Chase Kimball. Okay, so he was related to Heber C. Kimball and Newell K. Whitney. That's quite a heritage, yeah? One of the original 12 apostles, and for many years a member of the First Presidency, yeah, under Brigham Young. He was named for his uncle, Orson K. Whitney, another of the pioneers, and for his father's friend, James Ferguson. My earliest recollection, says the bishop, is the move in the spring of 1858. 1858? He was only 3 years old. Wow. Just before Johnston's army passed through Salt Lake City. I was not then 3 years old, yeah. But I distinctly remember incidents of the journey to and the sojourn at Provo, where my father's family resided until the general returned north in the summer. Bishop Whitney was educated in the common schools of his native town and in the University of Deseret, now University of Utah. Okay, always fond of books as a child, shocking. He showed remarkable powers of memory and of studious concentration. He excelled in reading, spelling, penmanship, grammar, and elocution, and at the university was considered the best declaimer in the school. What in the world is a declaimer? What is that? Okay, a declaimer was a person who recited speeches or poems publicly, often with focus on rhetorical effect, elocution, or passionate delivery. Okay, so he was an orator. You know, you could just say that. It's so weird that they had weird names for stuff like that back then. A declaimer. Okay. The best declaimer in the school. There you go. He was giving, like, dramatic readings, then, of things. All right. His artistic temperament prevented him from taking kindly to mathematics, and his progress in figures was only fair. So, why are we even talking about that? Like, can you imagine somebody writing your biography and mentioning that you were bad at math? Like, thanks, I guess? Like, why would you say that? Like, who cares? Talk about what he was good at, you know? As a lad of 13, he worked on the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad, then being built from Green River west. He was in the employ of his uncle David P. Kimball, a subcontractor whose camp was successfully on Sulphur Creek, Yellow Creek, and Bear River. There, for the first time, young Whitney saw rough life, but had no taste for it, shocking, and passed through scenes of peril and wickedness unscathed. This was in the summer and fall of 1868. He was from home 3 months and returned with $150. Let's see. 1868, wasn't he like 13? Huh. The first money he had ever earned. A year or two later, he entered the university, but at the close of the school year in 1871, temporarily quit the life of a student and sought business employment. Well, you probably ran out of money. He was successfully an express driver, a clerk in a music store, and a sewing machine agent in southern Utah and other parts. See, I don't think that's weird. Like, you run out of money, you get a job. You know, that's what you do. Then came a final year at the university, 1873 to 74. Okay, and a winter, so he was 22, and a winter in Bingham Canyon, 1875-76, okay, working for a mercantile firm. While at the university, he with others organized the Wasatch Literary Association, which had a very successful career. Okay. He was its first, and 4 years later, its last president. What? Why did they close it? Huh. He was also connected with the Delta Phi and Zeta Gamma debating societies, adjuncts of the university. He was not much of a speaker at that time, however, nor had he developed as a writer, though both gifts were latent within him. Says the bishop, I was musically inclined, having inherited that talent from both father and mother, and from the latter also came a poetic tendency. From my father came memory and love of books, also strong predilections for the drama, of which he was one of Utah's earliest representatives. Okay. I was always singing, whistling, and declaiming. And as a youth, I mastered the flute, my father's instrument, without a teacher. Okay, so he has a good musical ear. Like, you can learn instruments without a teacher if you have a decent ear for it, yeah. I also taught myself the guitar. Okay. This, however, as well as my flute practice, was after learning the notes and taking a few lessons upon the organ from Sister Lucy B. Young. I made my debut upon the dramatic stage about the year 1872, though I had figured in many amateur performances prior to that time. Okay. So, he's basically a theater nerd, you know? I mean, these are all kinds of typical things that theater people love. You know, like writing, poetry, drama, acting, music, let's all performing arts. So he's a performing artist. I was at once offered a place in the regular stock company of the Salt Lake Theater, but declined it out of deference to the wishes of my parents. His parents didn't want him to? Why not? Several years later, I was preparing to follow the dramatic profession when an event occurred that changed the current of my thoughts and altered the whole course of my life. I was called upon a mission to the United States. Okay. Up to this time, I had bent most of my energies in the direction of music and the drama, which I dearly loved. I had no desire to be a writer or a public speaker, and did not dream that I could make any mark either in literature or in oratory. Still less did I imagine that I was destined to become a preacher of the gospel. As a child, I was religiously inclined, though I revolted to some extent against religious discipline. Okay. I believed in God and in the hereafter, and would pray more or less regularly, especially if in trouble. But as a youth, I became indifferent to spiritual things, though at the same time I led a moral life. Okay. That's perfectly legit. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's just an indication that your testimony isn't quite where it should be, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are in any sort of trouble. I think that in general, it can lead down a bad path, but it doesn't necessarily have to. That's my opinion. I had a horror of unchastity, which I had been taught to believe was next in heinousness to murder. Humorously inclined, fond of fun and amusement, still I was generally serious, and sometimes melancholy. That's another word for depressive. Yeah. At the age of 11, I was baptized. Okay, and confirmed a member of the church by my uncle David P. Kimball officiating. Interesting. I would never have guessed that he wasn't baptized at 8. Baptized at 11. That's interesting. But I held no office in the priesthood until the spring of 1873, when I was ordained an elder by the late William J. Smith, afterwards a patriarch in the Salt Lake Stake of Zion. This was preliminary to passing through the endowment house. I had attained my 21st year when, in October 1876, I was called upon my first mission, the one mentioned. Though poorly prepared to preach, I had faith enough to accept the call. And having been ordained to 70, I departed from my field of labor. Okay. As an instance of the overruling providence of God, I will state that my mother, finding it impossible to dissuade me from going upon the stage, had promised me that if she could sell a certain piece of land, she would let me have enough money to take me to the city of New York, where I hoped to begin my theatrical career. Oh, interesting. So he wanted to be an actor. I love this. That's great. Full disclosure, when I was 14, I wanted to be an actress. And I love, theater's fun, I understand his passion for it. I didn't quite have enough passion for it. I ended up going in a completely different direction, but I feel like that's the kind of dream that most people have at one point. And if it's not that exact one, it's something similar. And most people don't attain them either. It didn't sound like he did either, but it sounds like he was a lot closer than I was, let's put it that way. Every effort was made to dispose of the property without avail, but no sooner had I signified my intention to accept the call for a mission than the land was sold, and out of the proceeds my expenses were paid to the state of Pennsylvania, my first ministerial field. Interesting. So that sale of the piece of land, instead of sending him to New York to become an actor, sent him on his mission to Pennsylvania. In Lucerne and Lancaster counties, Elder Whitney labored for several months, most of the time in company with Elder A. Milton Musser, who is a native of the Keystone State. A. Milton Musser, I'm pretty sure he spoke at conference several times. So, I'm not sure in what capacity. I think it was a stake president? Something like that. So that name does ring a bell to me. During that period, he visited the city of Washington at the invitation of Mr. James A. McKnight, an old Salt Lake friend then residing at the nation's capital. Okay. He visited Mount Vernon and other interesting points, which he afterwards described in letters to the Salt Lake Herald. Okay, so he wrote little articles about his travels. Spent an afternoon in the House of Representatives by courtesy of Honorable George Buchanan, Utah's delegate, and at the expiration of 2 weeks, returned to Pennsylvania just before the inauguration of President Hayes. Okay, that's Rutherford B. Hayes, I believe. The spirit of his mission was not yet thoroughly upon him, and he candidly confessed that he was then more interested in his newspaper correspondence than in the labors of the ministry. That was kind of true of a couple of people at the time. It's like, you know what? I really like writing these articles about the travels. Missionary work, not so much. Interesting. About this time, he had a remarkable dream, which he thus relates. I thought I was in the Garden of Gethsemane, a witness of the Savior's agony. I seemed to be standing behind a tree in the foreground of the picture, from which point I could see without being seen. The Savior, with the apostles Peter, James, and John, entered the garden through a little wicket gate at my right, where he stationed them in a group, telling them to pray. He then passed over to my left, but still a foot of me, where he knelt and prayed also. His face, which was towards me, streamed with tears, and he besought the Father to let the cup pass, and added, "Not my will, but thine be done." Having finished his prayer, he arose and crossed to where the apostles were kneeling fast asleep. He shook them gently, they awoke, and he reproved them for their apathy. Again he bade them pray, and again crossed to his place and prayed, returning as before to find them sleeping. This happened 3 times, until I was perfectly familiar with his face, form, and movements. He was much taller than ordinary men, and though meek, far more dignified than any being I had ever beheld. And he wore a look of ineffable tenderness and compassion, even while reproving his disciples. My heart went out to him, as never before to anybody or to anything, and I loved him with all my soul. I wept at seeing him weep, and felt for him the deepest sympathy. Then, of a sudden, the circumstances changed, though the scene remained the same. Instead of before the crucifixion, it was after. The Savior and the 3 apostles, whom he had beckoned to him, now stood in a group at the left, and were about to take their departure, ascending into heaven. I could endure it no longer, but rushed out from behind the tree, fell at his feet, clasped him around the knees, and begged him to take me also. With a look of infinite tenderness, as of a father or an elder brother, he stooped, lifted me up, and embraced me, saying as he did so in the kindest and gentlest manner possible, while slowly shaking his head and sweetly smiling, "No, my son, these can go with me, for they have finished their work, but you must stay and finish yours." Still I clung to him, and the contact was so real that I felt the warmth of his bosom as I rested upon it. Gazing up into his face, I once more besought him, "Well, promise me that I will come to you at the last." Again he smiled sweetly, and there was a look as if he would gladly granted my wish had it been wise to do so. He then said, "That will depend entirely upon yourself." I awoke with a sob, and it was morning. This dream made a wonderful impression on me, paving the way to my thorough conversion, which soon followed. There you go. He needed a really strong spiritual experience. That's beautiful. Among the things it taught me was not to sleep at my post, and to regard first the duties of my mission, and not allow anything to interfere with them. I like that. A lot of these kind of stories tend to be a little bit draggy, but that was really interesting. That was clearly well written as well, so I have to give props to him. Yeah, sometimes he can be overly flowery. That was actually just the right amount. That was lovely. I really liked that. And it's very uplifting, the thought of that Jesus Christ would not want us to leave until we had finished our work, yeah? And that's kind of the message, yes? In the spring of 1877, Elder Whitney went alone to northern Ohio, where he spent a year preaching, baptizing, studying the gospel, and writing for the press. Okay. Though feeling weak, he put his trust in God and developed far more rapidly, now that he was alone, than he did or could while having an experienced missionary as his companion. I wonder, that's an interesting statement. I'm not sure I agree with that. He developed far more rapidly now that he was alone than he did or could while having an experienced missionary as his companion. The thing is, the missionaries go out 2 by 2 for a reason. And one of the reasons is, several reasons, but one of the reasons is that you need the experienced person to go with you to teach you what to do, yeah? And sometimes the other companion has good ideas too. You have to be open to getting feedback even if you are leading the group. But I feel like in this case, he was by himself. That's really unusual. And I'm not sure I would say that he learned more than he could have if he had had a companion. I don't know. It seems like a weird thing to say. How do you know that? You know what I mean? He made marked improvement as a speaker and writer, grew in faith and knowledge daily, and ere long the fullness of the gospel testimony came like a burst of sunshine upon his soul. He knew he was engaged in the work of God and rejoiced exceedingly in that knowledge, which has never left him. Okay. A succession of miraculous incidents attended his ministry, and he was instrumental in converting a number of souls. At proper intervals, he kept up his correspondence begun in Pennsylvania to the Salt Lake Herald, his letters signed Iago, being very popular with the readers of that journal. And he contributed signed articles to the Deseret News, being invited to do so by President Brigham Young, who wrote to him repeatedly and gave him kind and fatherly counsel. You might think that Brigham Young was dead by then. No, he wasn't. He died in 1877. So this was, 1875, I think? So no, he was still around. From the suburbs of Elyria? I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. Elyria, I think it is. Lorain County, Ohio, where he made his home at the hospital farmhouse of Brother Truman Frink, whose wife, Sister Angeline Gleason Frink, was a second mother to him. He made visits into the neighboring parts, including Cleveland, Kirtland, Painesville, Akron, and other towns. Kirtland, once the headquarters of the church, was his father's birthplace. Oh, interesting. And in that vicinity he found relatives who, though not Mormons nor lovers of Mormons, received and treated their Utah cousins with great kindness, seeking earnestly, though vainly, to convert him to their faith, Methodism, and shedding tears of genuine regret when he left them to return no more. It's interesting. So they're like trying to convert each other. Honorably released from his mission, he returned to Utah in the spring of 1878, arriving home on the first day of April. He was at once offered a position on the staff of the Salt Lake Herald, but declined it, partly because it involved night work, which he feared his health, somewhat delicate at the time, would not permit. Okay, but mainly because it would monopolize his Sabbaths, which he wished to devote entirely to the service of God. His days of indifference to religion were over. Okay, sorry, I misread that at first. He had prayed fervently while away that he might never throw off the gospel harness as many missionaries had done, and as some predicted he would do. But he had also prayed that he might never again be out of employment, which had been the bane of some of his youthful years. It was a sacrifice, therefore, to refuse the first offer of a situation that came to him after his return. But he made that sacrifice for the gospel's sake. I'm sorry, no, he didn't. He did it because he didn't want to work nights. Weird. And about 2 weeks later found himself employed in the business office of the Deseret News, being placed there through the influence of Apostle Brigham Young, one of the editors of the paper. That's Brigham Young Jr., because at that point Brigham Young was dead. That's interesting to me. It's really weird. So he got the position basically because he was Heber C. Kimball's grandson. Am I right? It sounds like nepotism. Like, this doesn't really sound like he earned it. I mean, obviously he wasn't bad at what he did, but the fact that they did choose him and that unemployment was kind of high at the time, I mean, I don't know what it was exactly, but he did struggle with it, so it sounds like he's a touch picky about what he did. I mean, it's fine to be picky about what you do, but you have to take with it the possibility of being unemployed for a while, yeah? President Angus M. Cannon of the Salt Lake Stake also kindly interested himself in his behalf. In August, he became city editor of the News, succeeding Elder John Nicholson, who was called to Europe on a mission. John Nicholson was clerk of General Conference for years. Years. Meantime, Elder Whitney was made bishop of the 18th Ward, over which Elder Nicholson had presided during an interim between the resignation of Bishop Lorenzo D. Young, he resigned, and the appointment of the regular successor. Interesting. Resignation of Bishop Lorenzo D. Young. Okay, so he was like an interim bishop, yeah? Before an official one was called? That's weird. I've never heard of that before. Prior to that, he had served a short while as a ward teacher and as secretary of the Central Committee of YMMIA. That's Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association, if you don't know what that stands for. His appointment to the bishopric on the evening of July 14th, 1878, came as a complete surprise. Yeah, I'll bet. Especially the fact that he was what? Yeah, so he was 23. Come on, sheesh. He was on his way to the ward meeting then held in President Brigham Young's old schoolhouse inside the Eagle Gate when he met a friend who invited him to go elsewhere. "No," said Whitney jocularly, "I must go to meeting. They are going to put me in bishop tonight." And went on, little dreaming that such was indeed the case. Oh, he joked about it beforehand? That's so funny. He's like, "Oh yeah, I have to go because, they're going to make me bishop." He's a little 23-year-old dude. Gosh. He had been told that a bishop would be chosen that night, but he had no idea upon whom the choice would fall. He was astounded when the president of the stake, addressing the people, said, "It is proposed that Orson F. Whitney be the bishop of 18th Ward." He was unanimously sustained, and after expressing his willingness to accept the call, was ordained a high priest and set apart by President Daniel H. Wells, then acting as a counselor of the 12 apostles. Yeah, crazy. Apostles George Q. Cannon and Brigham Young assisting in the ordination. I hate mentioning this over and over again. Brigham Young Jr. Yeah, Brigham Young Jr. Because they don't list it often enough. They just say apostle or elder Brigham Young, and I hate that because there was, Brigham Young, the President Brigham Young, was also an elder at one point. And if you don't have that perspective that he was already dead at this point, that it would definitely confuse you as to why they're mentioning Brigham Young. Brigham Young Jr. I don't believe he was his oldest son. I think he was his second, or was he his oldest? I don't remember. But, yeah, one of the older sons of Brigham Young. Bishop Whitney was then but 23 years of age, yes, so I said, and unmarried, an unheard of thing in a Mormon bishop. And as a parting shot, the president of the stake said humorously to the congregation, "Paul says that a bishop must be the husband of one wife. It is to be hoped that Bishop Whitney will soon qualify." Yeah, I was about to say, because even today, I don't think that they call unmarried men to be bishop. Is that right? I'm pretty sure it's a requirement that the bishop be married. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that that was the case because of that statement of Paul, that a bishop should be the husband of one wife. Yeah? He was given as counselors elders Robert Patrick and William B. Barton, men of ability and experience who have worked faithfully with him for the good of the ward, which has grown during this administration from one of the weakest and smallest to be one of the wealthiest and most populous wards of the stake. In the winter of 1878-79, Bishop Whitney went on a preaching tour through Cache Valley. His first visit to that part, and at Hiram received his first patriarchal blessing under the hands of Father O.N. Lillianquist, then bishop of that place. He also made a very successful canvass in the interests of the Deseret News. Okay, let's throw some business in there, business and pleasure. Bishop Whitney married, on December 18th, 1879, Miss Zina Beale Smoot, a native of Salt Lake City, but from childhood a resident of Provo. She was a daughter of President Abraham O. Smoot of Utah Stake. Okay. The marriage ceremony was performed by President Daniel H. Wells at the Endowment House in Salt Lake City. There's a lot of heavy-hitting, names here. Here the young couple took up their residence, and here their first child, a son, was born October 27, 1880. Okay. In February of that year, the bishop was elected to the city council, representing the 4th precinct, composed of the 18th, 20th, and 21st ecclesiastical wards. He was nominated without his knowledge, and the first he knew of it being when he read in the morning paper the proceedings of the municipal convention of the People's Party, held the evening before. I don't know why there's so many, details there. In April of this year was organized... Okay, this year, so that was 1880, yes? Of that year, I think they mean. In April of that year was organized the Home Dramatic Club, an association of young people who spent their leisure hours rehearsing plays and presenting them upon the local stage. Well, good for them. Bishop Whitney was president of the club, and in the pieces presented by it, mostly of the Salt Lake Theater, sustained such leading roles as Frank Hawthorne in Extremes, not familiar with it, couldn't tell you, John Strebolo in The Banker's Daughter, also don't know it, and Matthew Standish in Peak, also don't know it. Sorry, I don't know any of those pieces. I'm sure they're interesting. I've just never read them. His first appearance with the club was in April 1880 when he impersonated Dr. Desmarets in The Romance of a Poor Young Man. His last appearance with them, and upon any stage, was in October. I'm sorry, I'm doing it on purpose. That's what it says. They mean October, but October 1883, when he played Martin Wheatstone in The Green Lanes of England. Okay, once again, something I've never heard of. He was very popular with the club and with the public, and when at last he decided to retire, they parted from him with many regrets. His reasons for retiring were that he found his dramatic engagements interfering more or less with his religious duties, and he feared that his example might induce other people to embrace the stage as a profession. Dude, you almost did that! What a hypocrite! Come on! Gosh! No, you can't be like, you shouldn't be an actor because, I was almost an actor. What? What are you talking about? Gosh, that's so dumb. In October 1881, he was called upon a mission to Europe to labor in the editorial department of the Millennial Star at the headquarters of the European Mission, 42 Islington, Liverpool. Okay, he was given a farewell benefit by his colleagues of the Home Dramatic Club and left home on the 24th of October, sailing from New York on the SS Arizona, November 1st, and landing at Liverpool on the 10th. It being desirable that he should have some acquaintance with the mission before entering upon his editorial duties, he was assigned to the London conference as a traveling elder. Okay, I was wondering about that. Like, why would you call a missionary just to serve in the office? Yeah, I guess that happened, because clearly it happened to him, but, like, how common is that? I'll bet it's not common at all. Like, we really need an experienced newspaper person to work for the Millennial Star. Like, we really need you there. I wonder if he took his wife. And his son, I guess. In that great city he labored zealously until the spring of 1882, preaching, baptizing, writing for the Star, and corresponding with the home papers. He was then summoned to Liverpool, where he continued in the ministry, while carrying on his regular work upon the Star and Journal of Discourses. Really? I didn't know he worked on Journal of Discourses. Journal of Discourses is really interesting. Before, there were very reliable periodicals where they would print, like, whole talks. They decided to, collect them into one book that they would then publish as a book, and you would purchase, like, volumes of the Journals of Discourses. And, a lot of the previous historical general conferences, like the full talks that I have, are from there. Of course, it ended in, 1880 something. It completely ended because they started printing them more often in the newspaper, and then they stopped for a while, and it was basically, in the 1890s, just gone. There weren't that many long talks printed at all, unless that was in Deseret News. And then they showed up again as a full-blown conference report in 1897. And how do I know that? Check out my website, historicaljournalconferences.weebly.com, because they're all there. All of the ones I could find. All the ones that I felt like were speaking during conference, any of the talks that were in there that were from conference. Not all of them were from conference. Sometimes they were from a fireside, sometimes they were from an address to a stake or something. And so Journal of Discourses had lots of different talks from different places. But that was a really, really big source of general conference talks back in the day. So it's interesting to me that Orson F. Whitney worked on them. He must have been editor then, or choosing which talks to include, maybe? Yeah? He was at 42, that's the address, right? 42 Islington, Liverpool, or something like that. For about a year during the closing part of President Albert Carrington's last administration and the forepart of the administration of his successor, President John Henry Smith. Interesting. Oh gosh. I wonder if he testified against Albert Carrington, because I understood that the reason Albert Carrington was excommunicated was his behavior during his mission in England. This time, this mission. I wonder if he testified against him. I don't know. Basically, he started flirting with this girl. I say girl because she was 16. And he was saying that he wanted to marry her, And at first she was all for it, and I'm pretty sure they slept together, and then eventually she said, nah, I don't want to. Changed her mind. They didn't get married. And people witnessed their behavior in public, where it was obvious they were together, to the point that it wasn't a secret anymore. And he had met her on the mission. So I'm pretty sure that he was excommunicated mostly for his behavior while serving as the mission president. Like, can you imagine? Like, you're supposed to be setting an example and you treat people like that? Like, wow. That's pretty shady, dude. Like, just the fact that he had an affair is bad, but, like, the fact that he had an affair while preaching to others to not have affairs, and then went on about his life as if nothing happened. They didn't even find out about it. Like, the first presidency didn't find out about it until somebody who left the church posted, like you would say posted today, but he wrote a little short article for the Salt Lake Tribune, accusing him of these things. And then the first presidency looked into it and were like, oh, it's real, it's true. Oh gosh, it's true. And they excommunicated him. And I wonder if Orson F. Whitney was one of the witnesses. It sounds like he would have been, yeah, since he was in the office at the time. That's interesting. Wow. I'm sorry I got so distracted just right now. Let's try to move on a little bit faster, but that's really interesting to me. The latter, early in 1883, finding that the bishop's health was failing, through close confinement to the office, gave him permission to travel at will through the British mission, and to begin his itinerary by presiding over the London Conference during the temporary absence of President Joseph A. West upon the continent. While in London, he saw and heard the great Gladstone in the House of Commons, and caught glimpses of other celebrities such as General Lord Wolseley, I think that's how you say it, Admiral Seymour, and Henry Irving. While still there, he was apprised of the death of his second child, Heber Kimball Whitney, whom he had never seen, the little one being born after he left home. Oh, that's so sad. Soon after this, he was honorably released to return. He had previously visited Wales and various parts of England, attending conferences and holding indoor and outdoor meetings. 2 of his jaunts without purse or scrip were with Elder Joseph A. West through the countries around London. He now made flying trips to Scotland and France. I love how they say flying trips. I don't think they mean on a plane. And why do I say that? Because planes weren't really a thing. I mean, we're talking about 1883? Like, there were no airplanes then. So what was it? Was it like a hot air balloon, maybe? Maybe it was a hot air balloon. A dirigible. Yeah? Elder George C. Parkinson being his companion upon the latter journey. They spent a week in the city of Paris, and on June 20th, 1883, sailed from Liverpool on the SS Wyoming, landing at New York Sunday, July 1st, the very day and date of the bishop's birth, 28 years before. Why? I don't know why that's significant. Okay, happy birthday. Then he says he, I was from another sphere, now from another hemisphere. He reached home on the 7th of July. That's a weird thing to say, but okay. In October, he resumed his former position on the Deseret News and his reportorial duties with those of the bishopric, besides lectures and miscellaneous writings, kept him very busy. In December 1884, he severed his connection with the News, accepting an appointment by the City Council to the office of City Treasurer to serve the unexpired term of Paul A. Shetler, deceased. Oh, okay. So they needed a new city treasurer because the previous one had died in office. Yeah, okay. At the next municipal election, he was chosen to the same office and was regularly re-elected every 2 years until 1890, when he declined renomination. Okay. In the city election of that year, the People's ticket was defeated, the Liberals coming into power. Treasurer Whitney's final report showed upwards of $250,000 in the treasury. Cool. At the opening of the 28th session of his territorial legislature, 1888, he was a minute clerk of the House of Representatives, but in the midst of the session, in order to fill a vacancy caused by resignation, he was chosen chief clerk of that body. Cool. In the summer of the same year, he went with his wife and little daughter Helen on a trip to Colonia Diaz, Mexico. What about his oldest son? Was he still around? Returning by way of Denver, Colorado, where they spent a week or more. Cool. During the same period, he was treasurer for Salt Lake City. Bishop Whitney was chancellor of the University of Deseret, having previously been a regent of that institution. In November 1888, he completed his first book, The Life of Heber C. Kimball, which I have read and is excellent. I can highly recommend. Published by the Kimball family. Its success was instantaneous and the sale large. Yeah, that's because it's excellent. It's really excellent, so I have quoted it in some of my articles. His second book, Poetical Writings, appeared in the winter of 1889-90. It is a collection of poems and poetic prose, written at sundry times since the year 1873, when he began to make verses. Okay. He also prepared, about the year 1889, later Leaves from the Life of Lorenzo Snow. A biography yet remaining in manuscript. Okay, that explains. I'm like, wait, I haven't even heard of that before. Yeah, that's why it hasn't been published. An intimate acquaintance and warm friendship between President Snow and Bishop Whitney began a short time before the writing of this work, while the former was a prisoner for conscience sake in the Utah Penitentiary, where the latter visited him and predicted that he would not serve out his sentence. A prediction that was fulfilled. Okay. Zippity-doo-dah. During the heat of the crusade, when most of the leading brethren were in prison or on the underground, a great deal of public preaching devolving upon the bishop, who was the first elder appointed to hold a Mormon service at the penitentiary. It was about this time that the town of Whitney, Idaho, was named for him by the people of that place. Really? In the spring of 1890, he began his most extensive literary work, The History of Utah, in 4 large volumes, 3 of which have been issued, while the 4th, a biographical volume, awaits publication. Okay, this is when this article was written in 1901. Okay. He was appointed to this work by President Wilford Woodruff, but was paid for it by Dr. John O. Williams of Colorado, the inaugurator of the enterprise, inaugurator of the enterprise, who subsequently sold the business to Cannon and Sons of Salt Lake City, by whom the history was published. The work has received much commendation and has been placed in the leading libraries of the land. The bishop has written many poems since his first poetic volume passed through the press, 2 of the most notable ones being Columbus and Napoleon. In the fall of 1893, he accompanied the First Presidency and the Tabernacle Choir to the World's Fair at Chicago, visiting en route Denver, Kansas City, Independence, and St. Louis. Okay. At the fair, he made the presentation speech accompanying the gift of a cane from the choir to Director General Davis. In politics, he was a member of the People's Party up to the time of its dissolution. Okay, that requires a little bit of explanation. So, back in the day, the people of Utah didn't care very much for the 2 major parties. And because of that, like the Republicans and Democrats, because of that, they kind of refused to join either of the parties, and they made up their own. They called it the People's Party, and it was the one most people belonged to back then. And it was so common that eventually, at one point, there were members of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 who requested certain members to join other parties simply because there were too many people in the one party. It was kind of a landslide. It was kind of a monopoly. And that's not the point of politics. Yeah? And they wanted people to have a little more diversity. So they had to actually kind of unnaturally request people to have a different party. Like please, like, if everybody's in the same party, it will look like we've rigged the election. And it's kind of true. So that's what the People's Party thing was. Eventually, it was completely dissolved, and they had to choose between Republican and Democrat. And that's where there's some confusion about people in the church being Democrats versus Republicans. Well, they kind of were neither for a while. I mean, not everybody was in the same party, but like, it's interesting that continues to be a subject people don't understand completely. He then stood aloof from the party affiliation until the fall of 1894, when he declared himself a Democrat, and by request of his party leaders became a candidate for delegation to the Constitutional Convention. the body that was destined to frame for Utah her state constitution. Okay. That's cool. That is cool. During the campaign preceding the election, he had his first experience as a political speaker, addressing meetings in San Pete and Summit counties, also in Salt Lake City and Provo. He was elected November 6th, receiving the highest number of votes cast for any delegate in the 4th precinct. Well, that is what it means to win an election, is it not? I'm sorry. It sounds like... Okay, that wording is interesting, that's all. In the convention, which met in March 1895, he served upon some of the principal committees, and took a leading part in the great woman suffrage debate, one of the main features of the proceedings. His speeches in that cause were published in pamphlet form in the Utah Women's Suffrage Association. His side was victorious, woman suffrage being placed in the Constitution. He was one of the committee that revised the entire instrument prior to its transmission to Washington. That is cool. Very, very interesting. In January 1896, he accepted the chair of philosophy, created for him in the Brigham Young College at Logan, where he resided until July 1897. There being no applicants for philosophical studies, he taught theology and English instead. He was like, I want to teach philosophy. They're like, awesome, let's teach philosophy. Let's create a philosophy department. Wait, we don't have any students. Why don't you teach theology and English? They'll eventually get some philosophy students. Prior to accepting this position, he was offered the chair of history in the Agricultural College, also at Logan, but accepted the other tender because of his preference for the atmosphere of a religious institution. Okay. His services as an instructor has also been solicited by the Brigham Young Academy at Provo. Yeah, shocking. He was the recipient of a gold watch presentation by the members of his ward prior to his departure for the North, and was warmly received at Logan, where he made many friends, the women suffragists giving him a public ovation on his arrival there. That's cool. With his students, he was equally popular. He spent the summer vacation of 1896 in lecturing with other professors through Bear Lake, Box Elder, and Weber counties. He was appointed one of the regular lecturers at the Logan Temple and delivered special lectures at Logan, Salt Lake, Ogden, Provo, and other points. In June of that year, he was a guest of honor at a banquet given by the Sons of the American Revolution at Salt Lake City on the anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill, and made a speech on the genius of Americanism, which drew marked attention. Interesting. He had previously addressed the University Club on the origin of Mormonism and early Utah. Okay. At the close of the collegiate year in June 1897, he resigned his professorship, having better financial prospects, and returned to his native city in time to take part in the Utah Pioneer Jubilee at the unveiling of the Pioneer Monument July 20th. He read the dedicatory prayer for President Wilford Woodruff, whose feeble health barely permitted him to be present, and performed the act of unveiling. The bishop's contribution to the literature of the Jubilee was a poem entitled The Lily and the Bee, an allegory descriptive of the founding of Utah. It was pronounced by the official critics the most artistic poem among the many written for that memorable occasion. His were also the words of the Pioneer Ode sung during the Jubilee by the Tabernacle Choir, whose leader, Professor Evan Stevens, had won the prize for the best musical setting to those words. Okay, cool. That got turned into a song. That's pretty cool. He also acted as historian for the Jubilee Commission, preparing the Book of the Pioneers for the State Archives. He then resumed work upon the history of Utah, work temporarily suspended, owing to the financial stringency of the times. In the fall of 1898, he was elected a state senator, being chosen from the 6th Senatorial District, and took his seat in the upper house of the legislature in January following. The principal event of the session was in the vain attempt to elect a United States senator, a consummation thwarted by the disunion among the Democratic members of the Joint Assembly. In May 1900, a heavy sorrow befell the bishop in the death of his wife, Zina Beale Smoot Whitney, who expired on the 20th of that month, leaving to his care 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, most of them of tender years, and the youngest, a twin boy and girl a little over 1 year old. Wow. He was nobly assisted in his trouble by his other wife, May Wells Whitney, a daughter of President Daniel H. Wells, whom he had married in July 1888. In the midst of the anti-polygamy crusade, Apostle Moses Thatcher performing the ceremony. Okay, but that was pre-manifesto, yeah? I don't think there was anything wrong with that particularly. So, though having 2 little boys of her own, She assumed charge of the motherless children as well, and has been a staff and a stay to the entire household. Well, good, yeah? The names of his children in the order of their birth are as follows: Horace Newell, Heber Kimball, Emily, Helen Marr, Margaret, Charles Byron, Murray Wells, Albert Owen, Wendell Webb, Paul Van Cott, and Virginia Clayton. Okay. Senator Whitney also sat in the legislature of 1901 and made strong speeches in favor of the Evans Bill, a measure designed not for the restoration of plural marriage, as many supposed, but for the protection of aged polygamists from petty persecutions by the methods of the notorious Charles Mostyn Owen and his ilk. I like the word ilk. It's funny to say, ilk. It's like you're just swallowing. He also supported the Macmillan Bill, abolishing compulsory vaccination. Compulsory vaccination? Against what? Is that the smallpox vaccine? That's interesting. He also supported the Macmillan Bill, abolishing compulsory vaccination. Wow, I'm not at all familiar with this bill, but that is interesting that he opposed compulsory vaccination. Interesting. By request of the Senate and House, he delivered before the Joint Assembly a memorial address on the life and character of the old university tutor, Dr. John R. Park, late Superintendent of Public Instruction. During the session, he went with the legislature to Boise, where they were the guests of the Idaho lawmakers. At the grand ball given at the sanitarium in honor of the Utah visitors, he made, by request, a farewell speech, thanking the state and city officials and the people of Boise for their kindness and hospitality. The legislative train, before returning, ran up as far as Huntington, Oregon. His next trip, taken in March of the same year, was to the Pacific Coast, in company with his son Horace. Race. They call him Race? Hi, my name's Race. I don't know. And Mr. Allen Lovey, both of the Salt Lake Herald staff. After seeing the sights of San Francisco and its environs and meeting twice with the saints of that branch, he ran down to Monterey and had a last interview with President George Buchanan, who was there in a dying condition. At Pacific Grove, the bishop and his son met Harry Culmer, the Utah artist, and took the famous 17-mile drive in his company by his courtesy. Since the opening of the year 1899, Bishop Whitney has been regularly employed at the church's historian's office, where he succeeded to the labors of Elder Charles W. Penrose, the latter resuming his former position as editor-in-chief of the Deseret News. His duties comprise the keeping of the church journal, the answering of correspondence, the writing of special articles for the press, and other such service as may be necessary. In literary work, discourses, lectures, orations, funeral sermons, and miscellaneous addresses, along with his ecclesiastical labors, his mind, tongue, and pen are kept constantly busy. Among his leading lectures may be mentioned What is Education?, Oratory, Poesy, and Prophecy, Born Again, the Dispersion and Gathering of Israel, Zion and Her Redemption, and What Mormonism Has Accomplished. Okay. His baccalaureate address at the Agriculture College in 1895 is also well remembered. Among his most recent addresses were two delivered at the Tabernacle, one on McKinley Day, September 19, 1901, and the other at the General Memorial Service in honor of the prophet Joseph Smith. Bishop Whitney is now, March 1902, in the 47th year of his age, and has served more than half of his life in the bishopric. Wow. Okay, I'm surprised at how long that was and how very interesting they kept it. So props to Andrew Jenson. Sometimes he can wax poetic, but he didn't really in this case. I feel like everything he said was interesting, was engaging, and kept me hooked, So I will say that I do admire that. That's interesting. Okay, now we absolutely need to go to the Wikipedia page, because at this point, when the article was written, he wasn't even in the Quorum of the 12. They didn't even know he was going to be. And so I think that is kind of a big chunk of his life that was completely missing. Also, he was in his mid-40s when they wrote this. And, yeah, I just feel like we're missing a whole section, yeah? So let's take a look at the Wikipedia article. This is Orson, Ferguson, Whitney, 1 July 1855 to 16 May 1931. born in Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, was a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1906 until his death. Yeah. And that 1906 is why we don't have more information on him in this article. Because he hadn't been called yet, yeah? Early life. Whitney was... Oh, but that also explains why he wasn't covered in either of the series we read. Because Lives of Our Leaders was finished in 1902, or 1903, anyway, something like that. And The Greatness in Men didn't start until 1933, 34, something like that. Yeah, he just missed the window. And he was in the Quorum of the 12 from 1906 until 1931. Yeah. All right, early life. Whitney was the son of Horace K. Whitney and Helen Marr Kimball. Whitney's father, Horace, had set type for the original publication of the Deseret News and worked as a printer with the newspaper for 21 years. Background. Whitney was a politician, journalist, poet, historian, and academic. In 1878, as a young man, Whitney began a career in writing with the business office of the Deseret News, later becoming a reporter and the city editor. Whitney served as a missionary for the LDS Church for a time in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Yep, mentioned all of those things. During a mission in Europe for the LDS Church from 1881 to 1883, he acted as editor for the church publication Millennial Star. In 1896 and 1897, Whitney taught English and theology at Brigham Young College in Logan, Utah. Yeah, they mentioned all of these things. In 1899, Whitney accepted the position of assistant church historian and served in that position until he was called as an apostle. So, also historian, and I do want to mention that because I also have a page for church historians. We will get to them, but he will already be covered because we're talking about him today. Whitney was also involved in the politics of Salt Lake City and Utah. He served on the Salt Lake City Council in 1880, acted as city treasurer from 1884 to 1890, and served as a state senator in 1898 and again in 1901. Whew, okay, personal life. Like many Mormons, Whitney practiced polygamy. Whitney had 2 wives simultaneously, having married the second in 1888. After the 1890 Manifesto on Polygamy, Whitney became a strong supporter for the policy ending polygamy. Interesting. So he completely changed his tune. So he was married to 2 women, and then he, like a couple years later, he completely changed his mind. And I think he was just trying to be obedient to the Manifesto of 1890. But I do admire that. That's interesting that you would do something and to even follow it, and then when they're like, no, we're changing church policies and we're not doing that anymore, that he immediately says, okay, I won't do it anymore. Yeah? And I don't think anyone should. Yeah? Interesting. Writing. Whitney produced the lyrics to several LDS church hymns, including The Wintry Day Descending to Its Close, I am not at all familiar with that one, and Savior, Redeemer of My Soul. I don't think I know that one either. Music by Harry A. Dean. These hymns appear as numbers 37 and 112, respectively, in the current edition of the LDS Church Hymnal. Okay, and that's embarrassing that I don't know them. I just have never sung them before. I mean, do you sing these songs regularly? Because they are in the church hymnal, like I'm sure somebody does, but we don't. Whitney's historical works, although detailed, well-researched, and presented, are written from a Latter-day Saint perspective. Yeah, shocking. One 21st century historian has commented that they are locked in the ironclad orthodoxy of Mormonism. Like, I don't know that that's a critique, though. Like, come on. In June 1888, and published the following month in The Contributor, Whitney delivered a speech entitled Home Literature. The speech is widely credited with proving both permission and impetus for Mormon literature, and is the source of the sentence, "We will yet have Miltons and Shakespeares of our own." Interesting. I think that he kind of aspired to be that, yeah? I mean, Shakespeare also wrote for the stage, and since he was very interested in performing arts, I'm surprised that, like, it sounds like he wanted to be that, yeah? He's like, no, I'm the Shakespeare, that's me, yeah? Whitney prepared a biography of Lorenzo Snow, member of the Quorum of the 12, for publication in 1890, however it was not published at that time. It was entitled Latter Leaves in the Life of Lorenzo Snow. That's a lot of L's. In 2012, Dennis B. Horn published an edited and expanded version of this work under the same title with Cedar Fort Inc. of Springville, Utah. Really? Huh. This work covered the Snow's life from 1885 to 1889 and was written as a continuation of Snow's sister, Eliza R. Snow's work, Biography and Family Record of Lorenzo Snow. Huh. In publishing this work, Horn included Whitney's work as the first 9 chapters of his book, and then covered the following 11 years of Snow's life. And well, good for him. That's really interesting. Horn's published record only included about a third of Whitney's manuscript of his History of Lorenzo Snow. Okay. It's still cool. Like, it wasn't published up until that point. Publications include The Life of Heber C. Kimball, excellent book. Poetical Writings, 1889 to 90. History of Utah, 4 volumes. Elias, An Epic of the Ages. Love and the Light, An Ideal of the Westland. Huh, that sounds fictional. I mean, I don't know if it is, but it's interesting. All the others are like history and poetry, and then there's one that just sounds like a novel. I don't know if it is, but that's interesting. LDS Church Service. In 1905, 2 members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles resigned over a dispute regarding the 1890 Manifesto, which prohibited any further plural marriages within the church. John W. Taylor disagreed with the manifesto entirely. Matthias F. Cowley felt that it should apply only to the United States. In February of the next year, Marinell W. Merrill died, which left 3 vacancies in the quorum. At a general conference of the church on April 8, 1906, Whitney was called as an apostle, along with George F. Richards and David O. McKay, both of whom have quite a legacy. So, as well as Orson F. Whitney, for that matter. It's interesting, because I feel like John W. Taylor, Matthias F. Cowley, and Marinell W. Merrill, none of the 3 of them really had that huge of a legacy. I mean, a lot of people inside the church don't even know who they are. But then, if you ask people inside the church, do you know who Orson F. Whitney is? Or George F. Richards? Or David O. McKay? I feel like most people would know them. So it's interesting that the legacy of the 3, next people that were called to replace the previous ones was greater than the previous ones themselves. I wonder if that will continue to be a trend in the world. Death and legacy. Whitney died in Salt Lake City after being hospitalized for influenza. Happens. He was buried at Salt Lake City Cemetery. Whitney was the namesake of the community of Whitney, Idaho. They mentioned that as well. See also LDS Fiction and Whitney Awards. So he did write fiction. Huh. That's interesting. That was fascinating. I really liked that. And I feel like I know this person a lot better than I did before. Orson F. Whitney. I mean, it's... Okay, so let's see if I can summarize him a little bit. He's somebody who loved people. And he loved words and the way we express ourselves. And I feel like he would have continued to work in the performing arts had it been conducive to the rest of his other things that he was doing in life. There's just not enough hours in the day for all of that. But I feel like he was also very obedient when it came to following the recommendations of the prophets and apostles. And so once a decision was made, that he was willing to follow it, even if he had done the opposite earlier. And that he just really loved serving the people and doing things for the people. This is what it sounds like to me. I mean, his activity in politics, he tried to get suffrage for women, which actually succeeded. By the way, I skimmed over that a little bit, but women's suffrage in Utah was earlier than it was in the rest of the country. It was one of the first states to make it a state law that women were allowed to vote, which I will say props to him, and I would say part of that is due to Orson F. Whitney, so good for him. And I really appreciate that. Past that, I feel like he was just somebody who loved to inform other people about things that he felt were important, and that he had quite an active imagination and was able to move words around in his mind before he would write it down to get it to be just exactly how he wants to express his thoughts, which is quite a talent. Not only is it a talent, but it's something that you can cultivate over time. Yeah. And so he clearly did. And that's something that I struggle with a little bit. So I'm not super eloquent, in case you couldn't tell. Anyway, but I find that really fascinating, and I think that I really enjoyed this one. Much more than I thought I would at the beginning, considering the length of the article and like knowing that Orson F. Whitney himself sometimes waxes poetic. So I was really glad to see that this one was a lot more straightforward and a lot more down to earth than a lot of the previous ones have been. So awesome! I really enjoyed that. I hope you did as well. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.